Vladimir Putin is currently facing a severe crisis in his empire. As of June 2023, no one has posed such a significant threat to him as his good friend and favorite chef, Prigozhin. On the last weekend of this month, a highly surreal armed coup erupted. Prigozhin and his 25,000 mercenaries from the Wagner group announced their march from the Rostov towards Moscow. They were prepared to use military means to arrest senior Russian government officials like Shoigu and Gerasimov, and overthrow Putin's rule, which shocked the Moscow ruling group deeply entrenched in the quagmire of the Ukrainian war. However, just a day later, Prigozhin announced that he had accepted mediation from Belarusian President Lukashenko. He and his troops, who had already marched to a location 200 kilometers from Moscow, would withdraw to Belarus. As part of the deal, Moscow stated that it would no longer hold anyone responsible for this armed coup. Even though the mutiny has been quelled, there are still many unknown mysteries surrounding the entire event. For example, why would Putin's former close friend turn against him? Why did Prigozhin oppose Shoigu and other Russian generals? Was this military coup premeditated or a spontaneous decision? Why was Wagner able to proceed towards Moscow without hindrance after Putin ordered the Russian military to crush the rebels? And finally, the most imaginative question of all, what unforeseen consequences would occur if Wagner successfully occupied Moscow? Keep watching, and this video will provide you with the background of the entire event and offer a creative hypothesis. To fully understand the truth behind the coup, we need to have a comprehensive understanding of three aspects: who is Wagner? What happened before and after the coup? And what would happen if Wagner occupied Moscow? First, who is Wagner? Wagner is a Russian private military company similar to Blackwater. Unlike Blackwater, it has extensive ties to Russian President Putin himself. The company's founder and owner, Prigozhin, is a Russian oligarch who enjoys Putin's trust. Before becoming a de facto warlord, he had a criminal record as a chef. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, he became a wealthy man by opening high-end restaurants. However, his greatest gain from these establishments was not wealth but the connections he made with influential politicians, such as Russian President Putin and Belarusian President Lukashenko. With Putin's encouragement, this chef decided to put down his kitchen knife and pick up a rifle, forming a military company called Wagner. Despite Russian law explicitly banning such organizations, Prigozhin expanded his business with the help of Putin's power. Wealthy Prigozhin offered salaries much higher than those of regular Russian soldiers to recruit former military personnel, police officers, and even prisoners. Many conflicts, ranging from Syria to Central Africa, have seen the involvement of Wagner Group members. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Wagner has emerged as a formidable fighting force within the Russian camp. Some even perceive Wagner as President Putin's personal guard. Secondly, what exactly happened before and after the coup? Surprisingly, it was rumored that Putin's private armed forces turned their guns against Putin himself. In the Russo-Ukrainian War, Prigozhin and Russian generals clashed fiercely over command authority and favoritism in front of Putin. The Russian Ministry of Defense, led by Shoigu and Gerasimov, had always been secretly dissatisfied with the presence of Wagner. Gerasimov, at least, was a trained military man. As for Shoigu, Shoigu, the Tuvan construction foreman who has never served a day in the military, knows nothing about war except for pocketing military funds. Putin himself enjoyed seeing this kind of power struggle among his subordinates, as it gave him a wonderful sense of security. It can be said that from the moment Wagner set foot on the Ukrainian battlefield, this inevitable outcome of complete collapse was destined to happen. While Wagner was resting on the Ukrainian front lines, based on the recommendations of Russian generals, Putin decided to incorporate this army into the defense forces by directly signing a contract with members of Wagner. This action infuriated Prigozhin, as if the army was incorporated, Shoigu could fabricate charges and plot against him at any time. And at this point, Prigozhin, who had lost his usefulness and no longer had Putin's protection, had no choice but to make a desperate move and declare war on the Moscow group. On the day of the coup, Prigozhin claimed that his camp had been attacked by Russian missiles and then ordered his troops to march on Moscow. The panicked Putin immediately ordered the Russian military to resist, but in reality, very few responded. Due to their disgust with the Russo-Ukrainian War, both officials and ordinary people chose to turn a blind eye to it. Especially Sergei Surovikin, the former commander of the Ukrainian front lines, who held the military power, only released a video calling for an end to the coup, but did not assemble any troops to intercept. It was not until Prigozhin reached a satisfactory agreement with Lukashenko that this farce of a large-scale armed march came to an end. Of course, all of this happened too quickly, and maybe the young and strong President Biden had not yet woken up, unable to come up with any effective strategies to deal with this sudden situation, even though it could have been a good opportunity to swiftly end the Russo-Ukrainian war. As for Putin, he successfully preserved his crumbling power and continued his invasion of Ukraine. However, after this coup, Putin's influence in Russia has been greatly weakened. Thirdly, what would happen if Wagner occupied Moscow? Before answering this question, I would like to tell you that occupying Moscow is not an easy task. The difficulty of a siege is far greater than that of a field battle, and the defensive structures left over from the Soviet era are still effective. In this coup, Wagner did not make sufficient preparations, and their force of 25,000 troops is not enough to pose a threat to Moscow. However, the strongest fortresses are often breached from within. There are reports that Sergei Surovikin has been arrested by Putin, accused of knowing in advance about Prigozhin's plan to launch the coup. In this regard, Sergei Surovikin may be an accomplice of Prigozhin, and perhaps more senior Russian officials are involved as well. If they collude with the besieging Wagner forces, it is not impossible to occupy Moscow. Let's make a hypothesis. What would happen if Wagner successfully captured Moscow? In my opinion, it would trigger three chain reactions. Firstly, Ukraine could achieve complete independence. With Wagner occupying Moscow, Putin and Shoigu would lose command over the Russian troops on the Ukrainian front, leaving the Russian soldiers without leadership and plunging them into chaos. Just like during World War I, a political upheaval in the rear of Tsarist Russia quickly ended the war on the Eastern Front, as many disillusioned Russian soldiers would choose to lay down their arms and return home instead of sacrificing their lives for a seemingly hopeless war. Secondly, Moscow would give rise to a new military government. It's important to note that not all of Putin's opponents are necessarily angels. This might be a devilish power struggle. Prigozhin is not a seasoned politician, and all his previous government relations depended on Putin himself. Therefore, he lacks a strong power base in Russia to ensure his rule. The best option for him would be to find a proxy from the opposition to become the new president, while he and his allies, like Sergei Surovikin, would hold the real power behind the scenes through the military. To maintain control, they would have to exert greater military pressure on the people to suppress protesters compared to what Putin did. This means that the Russian people might find themselves in an even more challenging situation than during Putin's era. Lastly, Russia would enter an era of warlord conflicts. While we are aware of the state of democracy in Russia, Putin still holds the title of a legitimately elected president. Clearly, Prigozhin, who seized power through a coup, lacks any legitimacy. If a person like him is eligible to take control of the Kremlin, what would stop the more influential warlords scattered throughout Russia from taking action? They could easily gather their forces under the guise of defending the constitution and march towards Moscow, such as the case of Chechnya. A century ago, the sudden downfall of the Romanov dynasty created a power vacuum in Russia, leading to a 5-year-long civil war. As chaos intensifies, many of Russia's constituent republics might seize the opportunity to declare independence and become sovereign states, just like Finland, Poland, Lithuania, and others did in the past.